Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. We are introducing a brand new episodic series on this channel today called Palantir and Philosophy. And the goal of this series, really, I was thinking about for the past couple of weeks that I wanted to start, was that I think there are a ton of philosophies that are entrenched with trying to understand Palantir. This is why it's one of the most exciting companies in the world to talk about and cover. So this is going to be one of those episodes or those series that not super number driven, not super based on the news, all that stuff. You kind of have to open your mind. I would grab some coffee, grab a drink, and kind of just sit back and watch and enjoy me try to make the philosophical connections between ideals and axiomatic truths that exist within the broad branch of a school of philosophy and apply that to one of the most complex companies in the world. I think one of the reasons it's hard to understand Palantir is because there is a level of philosophy that's required to sort of truly understand Palantir. Like, yeah, you can understand it as a data analytics company, but I think that's an elementary understanding of Palantir. Because why do they work with immigration customs? Why do they work in Ukraine? You know, why is CARP always constantly talking about thinking of the ontology, which is the definition of ontology, is a state of being, and then applying that to a question of how your data basically magnifies the state of being of your organization. I mean, I think there is so much philosophy embedded within this organization, within this company, within their products, which if you just understand a little bit more about that philosophy, it gives you a better understanding of your investment. And I think one of the reasons why it's hard to invest in Palantir is because even if you think it's a good company to invest in, because big data analysis, data analytics, all that stuff, if you really don't understand the company, you're never going to be able to hold it. And that's the same thing with Tesla to me. Like, if you don't understand the long-term vision of Tesla, it's a very volatile company. It's going to be very hard to ultimately hold that stock. So this is kind of the series where I wanted to uncover some of the philosophies that I think are entrenched within Palantir, and I think there's a lot of them. The other reason I think that I wanted to do the series was because I did a lot of debate in high school, and within debate, you have to basically study philosophy. I mean, I took a class called Theory of Knowledge, which was a 2-year course on literally philosophy at the end of the day. And when you do debate, you make a lot of philosophical arguments. So I was exposed to different philosophical schools of thought, like Kantianism, deontology, Rawls, veil of ignorance, utilitarianism. I mean, there's just so many different ideas and ideologies that I've been exposed to at a very young age because I had to learn them to be able to debate. If I didn't understand them, then I wasn't able to debate them effectively. And so I have studied a lot of philosophy, not at an academic level, but at least at a level where, honestly, I think it's better than some academics, quite frankly, because some of these academics that I've spoken to in philosophical debates, they don't really know how to debate their positions or even understand their positions. So I think I have a good grasp of some understandings of philosophy, and today is the first episode in this series. So today's episode is going to be about the concept of absurdism, which is a philosophical school of thought pioneered by Albert Camus, Algerian philosopher, and how it relates to Palantir. So let's talk about it. Absurdism. What is absurdism? Now, quite frankly, this is a good episode to start this one off on because absurdism is the philosophy that I've decided to live my entire life by. I discovered this philosophy back in, I would say, 2019, 2020-ish. And ever since then, it has fundamentally architected the way I view existence and the trajectory upon which I think life should be lived. And it's, my personal bias, but it's the philosophy that has influenced everything for me. Albert Camus is one of the most interesting philosophers of all time. He's underneath the school of existentialism. And essentially, absurdism was his play on trying to figure out how do we get meaning within a meaningless world. So Camus believed at a baseline level that the world is meaningless. There is no unique reason for why humans are here, why the planets are here, why, the sun comes up every morning. Everything to him was just a matter of random chance that happened to happen. There's no reason why it happened. There's no unique reason why it happened. There's no religious reason why it happened. There's no intrinsic reason why it happened. It just happened. And as a result of that, you get into the state of absurdism, which is like, well, if I don't know why it happened or what the purpose of it is, then what is the purpose? It's absurd. I mean, the very nature of existence, when you think of life in and of itself, you wake up every morning, you have to brush your teeth, you have to shower, you have to go to work. Why are you going to work? So you can pay off these bills. Why do you have to pay these bills? Because you have to survive. If you don't survive, you're going to die. Why do you have to eat? Because if you don't eat, you're going to die. Why do you have to get married? Why do you have to have kids? Because these are the things like you need in your life. Why do you need to have sex? Because, many humans can't go that long without sex. There's like all these random idiosyncratic ideas and concepts and physical material desires we have that is essentially absurd, right? Like there's no unique reason for why it exists. It just exists and we all have to live with it. And then we die after like 80 years if you're lucky. Then it's just all over. So it's just one of the most insane concepts in the world to be alive as a human being. And Camus, throughout his entire life, he was like, well, why does any of this make sense? And so as a result of that, He had one of the most important stories, I believe, of all time, called the Myth of Sisyphus. Now, what is the Myth of Sisyphus? Sisyphus is a character that is cursed by the Greek gods. And the Greek gods have basically said, look, Sisyphus, you are cursed. And because you are cursed, you have to take this rock and you have to plow it up a mountain every single day for the rest of your life. And when you get to the top, then the rock's going to fall back down. So Sisyphus is like, okay, so you're telling me I have to work really, really hard to, like, with my bare hands, take this big ass boulder, bring it up this mountain, and then when it falls down, I have to, like, do the same thing again. And the Greek gods were like, yep. And so Sisyphus started doing it. Now, the conclusion to this story is Camus said, one would imagine Sisyphus is happy. Now, why did he conclude Sisyphus would be happy? Because that's what absurdism means, and that's what embracing the absurd essentially is. It is being okay with the mundane, meaningless, intrinsic nature of life and making your own purpose. So Camus paints a story of this Greek character that is cursed by the gods, which is a metaphor for all of us being cursed by existence, having to wake up every morning, brush our teeth, go through these same routines. It's essentially pushing this metaphorical rock up the mountain. We're all doing this because we're all on some journey pushing our old little boulders up a mountain. And as a result of doing that, eventually the boulder falls down. Eventually we have to go back to sleep. We have to get a new job. We have to make more money. It's never enough. And then the final time we get the boulder up the mountain, then you die, right? Then it's completely, then you really do fall back down. Camus says that Sisyphus is happy doing this because the struggle and the pursuit, the work of getting that rock up the mountain, even though it's a meaningless thing to do. Everything we're doing in humanity is pretty meaningless because we're all going to die at the end of the day. And by the way, the Earth's going to die one day. There's a sun. That sun that gives us all the light and energy and oxygen and all that stuff we need, that's going to go away. It's a star. A star is going to burn out. When the star burns out, no matter what, whether it's 4 billion years from now or 400 million years from now, the Earth is going to burn out as well. There's going to be no Earth. Everything is going to be over. It's all going to be gone. You can believe in an afterlife. You cannot believe in an afterlife. That goes into a more religious conversation. But at a baseline level, this Earth is not going to exist. We are not going to be here anymore. And so if that's the case, how do you find meaning in a world that is intrinsically meaningless? And the only way to find meaning in a world that is intrinsically meaningless is to make your own meaning. So one would imagine Sisyphus is happy taking that boulder and pulling it up a mountain because he has no other choice than to be happy. And this is kind of, in the context of life, it's like, look, if you're in a situation where you don't really like your job or like what you're doing, if you can just imagine that it is something that's meaningful, if you can find the purpose within the mundane meaninglessness of it, then you architect a life that has some value because now you have finally created some purpose for you. And Camus' basic argument was the way to rebel against the tyranny of existence on an individual was to basically say, screw you, I'm going to find a way to make my life meaningful. Even though there is no meaning, I'm going to find some purpose in my life. And as a result of finding some purpose in my life, I'm going to do the ultimate act of rebellion against existence, which is to prove to existence that I have meaning within existence, which is the difference between absurdism and nihilism. Nihilism is accepting that there is no meaning to life. And so essentially, like, nothing matters. Absurdism is saying nothing matters, therefore everything matters. And having that optimistic spin at the end of this idea that nothing matters is the conclusion that I've realized is what I believe is the objective answer to life. I mean, I'd never really found salvation in religion and all these other things. What I really find salvation is in this concept of everything's absurd, nothing matters. It is just random. Why does this happen? Why does that happen? Why does it? But it's all random. And so you have to find meaning and purpose within the randomness. And what that helps you do from a philosophical perspective is when bad shit happens, you're like, oh, it's random. Like, I'm not being targeted. Everything's like, some things are good, some things are bad. Camus died in the most absurd way, a car crash. He died in a car crash. It's like one of the most absurd ways you could possibly die. It wasn't natural, it wasn't peaceful, it was a car crash. And so, it's ironic that he's talking about life is absurd and then he dies in one of the most absurd, random ways. But for him, you could argue that he found meaning and purpose in his life through the nature of being absurd. And one of his books, The Stranger, actually takes you through the plot of a character who finds, the absurdity of existence and eventually comes to the conclusion that there is some meaning to existence. But it is absurd in and of itself as he goes throughout the entire plot. Okay, so how does that relate to Palantir? To me, I think Palantir is a company that embraces the absurd. Why do they embrace the absurd? There's two reasons. Number one is Western democratic values that they feel have some purpose in the world they actually take a stance on, which is a very unique thing. To take a stance and to say, hey, I think life has purpose for XYZ is embracing the absurd because in reality, there is no meaning or intrinsic reasoning or purpose to anything. So for Palantir to not work with Russia, for Palantir to not work with China, for Palantir to be able to be like, hey, these values matter. We're going to fight like hell to defend these values. We're going to give our software to Ukraine for free in order for these values to actually have some, purpose in existence, and to take a sort of activist founder approach against investors that constantly want them to just take profits, I think is actually a very unique reason to invest in Palantir. And the ironic thing is that investing in Palantir for those reasons likely will yield better returns than investing in companies that are just trying to, maximize profit at all costs. Because when you're trying to maximize profit at all costs and you have zero purpose or values or ethical side constraints that you use in order to maximize that profit, it actually results in the worst type of companies in the world that inevitably are not going to be recognized by the global economy as like a good company to invest in or a good company to do business with. So I think the first argument is that Palantir actually has values and meaning and purpose. And so they take an absurd, meaningless world and they fill it with their own philosophical values. Every company tries to do this, but I think Palantir actually lives up to it. And as a result of that, actually embraces the absurd by having values that matter. The second reason why I think they embrace absurdism, or why absurdism is a philosophy that can be correlated to Palantir, is because the random, absurd things that happen in existence that have zero reason for happening requires remediation, meaning you have to solve those things that happen. And I think there's two main examples here. Actually, a couple more than two. The first one is COVID, the pandemic. Palantir was on the front lines as soon as the pandemic broke out to do vaccine distribution. Now, you can have your thoughts about vaccines, whatever. I don't really care about that. What I care about is, was their software ready to go when the government needed a software to help to be able to distribute these vaccines? And they were ready to go in the United Kingdom and in the United States. And that, to me, is incredibly valuable and incredibly important, which is that the abstraction you can take away from that event is that when something random or crazy happens, their software is there to resolve the absurdness of what's happening. I mean, a global pandemic's breaking out. Like, it's the crazy, like, I was in college my senior year. I was driving home from work because I was doing this part-time job. And, like, I put on Trump in the car. I had my phone in the stand, and, like, Trump's saying, "My fellow Americans." And he's, like, talking about how this is actually a serious virus. And I'm like, what? Like, this is how my senior year is going to end? Like, it was crazy, right? It made no sense. It was absurd. And so the idea that Palantir can be a company that you can rely on when that happens is important. Ukraine-Russia war, that's another example. All these companies' supply chains flipped overnight because obviously they had to leave Russia, they had to leave Ukraine, there was a bunch of stuff going on. Palantir software was there to help be able to resolve those processes and be an aid to those countries, not to mention an aid to Ukraine to protect their sovereignty, to be able to deal with the absurdity of what was going on, which is that a dictatorial regime, after 8 years of basically peace, decided to invade what they think is their land. Another example is Osama bin Laden. I mean, 9/11 is one of the most absurd, crazy, like 2 airplanes go into the World Trade Center. Like, it's just insane that would be the thing that would happen on a bright sunny day, but that's what happened. And in order to capture Osama bin Laden and have some justice to those families that lost so many loved ones, Palantir software was used, and it's well documented in all these cases. They never officially said it, but it's pretty well documented. Bernie Madoff being able to catch a guy who did massive amounts of crimes, Palantir software was used. So to me, there are so many examples of when things go crazy, when things are absurd, when things don't make sense, when random acts of violence or anything, humanitarian disasters, natural disasters happen. Palantir software is there on the front line trying to be able to resolve those things. So if you are an absurdist, if you believe in the philosophical school of thought that is absurdism, that is, life has no meaning unless we give it meaning, and that the absurd random things that happen to us, we can't take them that seriously, because if we do, we get into this whole like, oh my God, why is this happening to me? Versus recognizing that that is the very nature of existence, which is that there is no nature to existence and anything can happen because all of it is random. Then you start to recognize, well, if that is the world that we are in, and you believe in that world, what is a company that actually has values, so it tries to fill the void of meaninglessness existence with some meaning, and that is able to resolve the random things that maybe happen, whether they're man-made or geopolitical or natural, in order to help society progress and move forward? To me, I think that company is none other than Palantir. Those are my thoughts. Thank you for tuning in to the first episode of Palantir Philosophy. I'll see you on the next one.